now about how we capture them. So they're captured, Councillor Stewart, in a data hub concept, which is with our partners in SDS. The schools put into that, the college put into that. It's a really joint operation. We're actually discussing it at the CPP at 1 o'clock this afternoon. So ultimately they're tracked, and we go a wee bit further because we track them in the main through to 24 with the client base that we're working with. That wouldn't apply to all young people, so I wouldn't like to say we do that for all, because obviously when a young person goes away to university, etc., they're on their own 2 feet. Where we have learners at college, however, we can do a wee bit more in that space. That's a bit more controllable, particularly because of the really good relationships we've got with Ayrshire College. I'm going to move on to your next question, Councillor Stewart, which I think was around about digital transformation. So yeah, I would absolutely recognise the work we did, and can I say, and I've got my colleague Julie Jemison sat here, but can I say that that's been a really joint operation with our colleagues in IT, and that operation continues. So ultimately, Councillor Stewart, we've retained our digital officer and manager, Donna Kirkwood-Emery, and that's not just to work the likes of Glow in the schools, that's also to ensure access to equipment, etc. So it's the first time actually it's been in our report in this form. I think we're all learning that it's not something that's going to go away, and indeed when young people go to university, they're actually, or college, or into the workplace, to be quite honest, they're going to find so much of their learning is indeed online. So it's something that we need to keep the skids right underneath and make sure we're working, I don't know if that's the right turn of phrase, so keep it momentum, traction, that's what I wanted, to make sure that that's something that we keep going. So I would absolutely recognise that, and then as Chair's provided, we'll look at ASN transport, I think, through the East Ayrshire Performs. Thanks, Chair.
That was helpful, Linda, thank you. Any more questions for Linda? Okay, so the recommendations are laid out on page 92, if we can agree them. Okay, thank you very much. So the next item would be East Ayrshire Performs the Sum Report, and that's Julie. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, this is the second East Ayrshire Performs report of this financial year, and it shows the Council's financial position for the first half of 22-23. It was presented to Cabinet on the 9th of November, and it collates finance and service-based performance and gives members an indication of where we are at period 6. If I can start at paragraph 7 of the main report on page 133, where we can see that the Council's general fund balance is forecast to be £8.7 million or 2.4%. We require this usually to be between 2 and 4%, so it's towards the lower end of the range we set out, and it's after taking account of £500,000 that we've allocated to council tax reduction that was mentioned in the previous report. This is something that we're keeping a close eye on, and we'll continue to update members on this in the coming months. The report also captures details of the savings that were approved by Council in February this year as part of the budget, and £6 million of reduction measures have all been classed as green or amber at this point, and that's noted at paragraph 8. Colleagues in Finance and ICT and across the Council continue to work together to try to ensure that these options can be achieved, and any change to the current position will be reported to members going forward. Information and service budgets begins at paragraph 9, and members will note the position in the revenue budget at this point is not as favourable as it was in the previous report. There are a number of reasons for this, and touching on education, in the last report we reported the service was anticipated to end the year of around £300,000 over budget. It's now £1.3 million overspent in a projection due to significant pressures within additional support for learning, both in terms of the provision and the transport costs, as touched on in that last report. We know that the Head of Education and the management team, supported by colleagues across the Council, are reviewing this area, with work taking place to bring a report back to members in due course. Within communities and economy, the last report projected around £500,000 of an overspend. This is now £1.1 million of an overspend. We have significant costs in terms of waste disposal, and as members are aware, there was a separate report to Cabinet on this last month, and it was also touched in James's report earlier today as well. We hope over time that the measures proposed there will reduce the pressures and will create cost avoidance opportunities. However, as we go forward, there will be sustained pressure in this budget, and as we go through the budget setting process, there will be a need for the Head of Housing and Communities and the Chief Financial Officer to discuss this in more detail with members and political groups. We're also seeing significant costs for primary and secondary school transport costs, as we mentioned earlier. The Deputy Chief Executive and Chief Financial Officer are working on this, and a paper will be brought to members for discussion around options to bring this growing pressure and the budget back online. and allow members to scrutinise and challenge the options proposed going forward. In health and social care, the service is projecting to end the year underspent by around £5.3 million. However, it has significant variances throughout, and at the start of the year received around £5 million of Scottish Government funding to prepare social care for the winter. In addition, there are underspends in certain areas, and at the same time, the service has the £11 million balance that it received just before the year end to see it through COVID. Overall, the service has a significant amount of funding within it, but if you were to add up all the commitments that need to be delivered from that funding, then it will certainly present challenges for the service going forward. Members, at paragraph 13, we note the position with the pay award. We know that through the medium-term financial strategy, we estimate that cost to the Council this year for the SIC element to be £2.6 million. We're working on proposals for this and we'll bring these back to members in the coming weeks as we seek to close the in-year gap. Paragraph 14 of the report notes the cost of living and the substantial piece of work that's been done by this Council. Members will be aware that over £3 million of our own funding has been allocated to support groups and businesses across East Ayrshire. As part of the reports to Cabinet and Council, as well as discussions at the recent elected members' seminar, we note here that we're working towards producing a set of indicators. These will give elected members the opportunity to see how the cost of living is impacting on communities across the Council, and it will be reported through future East Ayrshire performance reports. It's also important to note that £3 million, when we add in the council tax reduction overspend of £500,000 and the issues that we've currently got in Scottish Welfare Fund, where this council is continuing to hold eligibility criteria as low as possible for both crisis grants and community care grants, that even though the budget's overspending, there's far more than £3 million being put into support cost of living across East Ayrshire. And we'll bring this forward in the next East Ayrshire performance report. Paragraph 15 touches on the capital programme. It mentions Galston Local Office and that the planning application has been approved and that we are about to go out to obtain the building warrant. We're hoping to have the tenders issued in return for early next year with a start on work around springtime. Meetings continue to take place with local members and the community to keep them informed and updated on the work that's taking place in this project. In paragraph 16, we mention the Dunlop Early Childhood Centre. Essentially here, Cabinet was asked for approval to appoint Ross Quality as the Clerk of Works in this project. We note here the challenges that colleagues in facilities and property management have had in terms of identifying a Clerk of Works for the project, but recognising that's something we need to take forward. Chair, excuse me. Chair, the sections. Chair, the sections in people and health and safety are covered in more detail in the summary report, and colleagues will take members through these areas. But it's important to recognise the substantial work colleagues within health and safety and across the council do in terms of suicide prevention, and that's noted in page 136. Finally, paragraph 27 notes the corporate risk register, which was updated by CMT on the 2nd of November. And members, there were no change to the status of any of the risks, and there were no new risks added during the period. Chair, I would propose that I stop here and take any questions.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for Julie on the revenue section? No. No. Yep. Councillor Cannon.
Just on page 141. £500,000 additional expenditure on council tax reduction. Can you just explain the reasons we're seeing for that and whether there's anything to worry about?
Julie?
So, your Chair, thanks. Yeah, currently we've got a budget of £9.5 million for that, and currently we're projecting at this point in time of the year that there's the additional expenditure on that will be £10 million. So that's the gap that we have currently. It's something that we're well aware of and we're watching. It's essentially that payment that people get in terms of help towards their council tax payments. But as I say, it's something that we're watching, and we're keeping a really close watch on that, and it's something that's really concerning us in terms of the funding around that.
Thanks.
Okay, any more questions for Julie on revenue? Councillor Stewart.
Just a question that I'd asked before about the ASL, the extra demands being made on that.
Over to you, Linda.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Stewart, and I can absolutely see why that question's been asked and the concerns that sit around that. So ultimately, members, the situation with ASN is one that's emergent nationally, but it's definitely having an issue here for us locally too. So colleagues, just to try and frame this very briefly in the time that we've got, so we've got a lot of young people that are needing one-to-one support. In terms of, not just post-COVID, but because of, their particular ASN type difficulty that they have. So there's one-to-one support that could be from a classroom assistant type perspective, or it actually could be additional staffing that's needed. Bear in mind on that as well, there's also a need for potentially further equipment or modifications to support that young person, dependent on their setting. So staffing's an issue for us straight away. Inclusion in itself, we are morphing what our schools look and feel like in terms of, the utilisation of, the whole neuro section in terms of NME, and actually to do so, we need to be able to resource that in terms of what inclusion looks and feels like in the schools. So that again is around staffing. It could be, modification that's actually required for the young people to be there, but predominantly that will come down to a staffing cost. And indeed, Councillor Stewart, as you've absolutely rightly pointed out, also additional transport costs, because a lot of our young people with ASN were duty bound, as David highlighted earlier in the meeting, are legally permitted to have private transport, and a lot of which does, going back to Councillor Mabin's point, take the form of smaller transport issues like taxis, etc. The other issues we do have, members, and I'm hopefully being as clear as I can about these, we have a lot of young people who would have been out with placements who can cost the council upwards of almost £7,000 a week. In terms of that, and we're keeping a lot of those young people now in our authority, so that there's aspects here that feel a wee bit, and I hate the phrase spend to save, but ultimately what we're finding is, as we include more people, more young people, and not exclude them as such to more out with type placements, which can be secure placements, and I know if my colleague Marion Macaulay was here, she would also speak to this, but we in education actually take their transport costs when they are given out with placements, so they don't actually fall to the other places, where the young people are going. They actually fall to us in education. So on those rare occasions where we do have an out with placement, those costs can be gargantuan, because we can actually be transporting that young person quite a considerable distance. So we're doing our very best through a renewed referral group to try and prevent the number of out with placements. Everyone wants young people born in East Ayrshire to stay in East Ayrshire. That's the bottom line. And ultimately, but by expanding inclusion and reducing exclusion, if you like, in that widest term, we are going to incur costs on that. So that's the other bit there. And then really, Councillor Stewart, coming back, the whole transport piece, and again, as highlighted by Councillor Mabin, is a really difficult one just now, because in the public eye, there is free transport available, but that's not the case clearly as being appropriate to young people with ASN who might require modified transport. Please also bear in mind, colleagues, that we have the addition of, we have minders in a lot of that transport as well for those young people, to be able to take them to school. And hats off to colleagues across my ASN sector. If you've ever seen the young people arriving at Willowbank in the morning, and I know several of you have been to visit Willowbank, it really is such a slick operation, but you will see it's hugely intensively resource heavy in terms of staff at Willowbank meeting those young people as they come in, the people who are in the taxis, the brilliant taxi drivers who bring them, who know these young people so well. So really, colleagues, I certainly don't shirk away from my responsibility of this being a local issue, but it is also a national one. But that's certainly something that we're finding just now, is the money to support inclusion, which clearly is at the front of our minds, is clearly on the increase. And that's the only way I could explain that to you at this point in time, Councillor Stewart, with being open and honest about the situation we find ourselves in.
Okay, thanks very much. Any more questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Chair. On page 134, section 14, the cost of living update. Have we got an update on how we are doing in the sense of progressing to increase the footfall to the breakfast and lunch clubs within the schools?
Linda, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Watts. So there's a cost of living paper that's been to Cabinet, and it's again under development through the strategic cost of living group. I think Joe Gibson will be speaking to the community planning partnership about that particular piece of work just now. So around about the cost of living piece and the accommodation for cost of living, Councillor Watts, what I understand at the moment, and I think we're moving away from the warm bank type feel, it's more about the warm welcome terminology, if you like, that Katie and the team are working with on that one. So the footfall around about that is not necessarily just bound to the schools. It was to make sure that if we did bring the schools in, what we didn't want was duplication of effort, and you could find yourself with 2 facilities for a warm welcome in one particular town and go to another town and there'd be nothing. So what's actually happened, Councillor Watts, the provision's been mapped across the council by my colleagues in Vibrant Communities and in the Health and Social Care Partnership. And what we do know at the moment is we're seeing a significant increase in the number of facilities for warm welcome. I'll use that terminology, such that people are able to go in and access that. The breakfast and the lunch clubs, Councillor Watts, they exist in terms of schools to accommodate young people that just require that free breakfast as such. And then the lunch aspects of that would be undertaken via the free school meals provision. So I hope that's helpful. I know I'm slightly outside my area of expertise there in cost of living, but I'm really pleased to have been a member of the strategic group on that. But if there's any more info required, I'd be happy to get that for you, Councillor Watts, recognising my own limitations in that space.
Okay, thanks. If there's no more questions. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. And back to Linda, and something that is in our expertise, I would think pupil equity funding. I'm a bit concerned that there's pupil equity funding not actually being used, and it's just sitting there. And what would happen? Would government claw that back, because it's pretty limited in what it can actually be used for? We're on page 145 of our papers. Grange Education Group and Shortleys Primary Schools in my ward, for example, they had 128,000 carried forward. They're getting a new allocation for 279, which gives them £408,000. What can they use that for, and why is it not being used? Why has it been carried forward? I've got the same at Hortriggs, just below 180,000, and their new allocation is 175. So they're £356,000 to be spent on that school.
Okay, Linda, do you want to come in?
Thank you again, Chair, and Councillor Mabin. I absolutely do understand how this looks on the cold face of a report, if you like, because it will appear that the money's not been spent. So first of all, the schools now are able to look at a 4-year planning cycle for PEF. So what we shouldn't see and what we don't want to see are schools just chucking the money to the wind sort of thing and not spending it in a planned and progressive way. So the schools now, as the government moved us from, the whole SAC front to the Scottish Equity Fund, the Strategic Equity Fund, and now the Pupil Equity Fund. So we now have, because we love acronyms, we've now got CEF, PEF and KEF, KEF being the Care Experience Fund. So the PEF one is dead simple in terms of what you can spend on, Councillor Mabin, and it's absolutely what it says in the tin. I'm really glad to report. It's very much about the promotion of equity and making sure that every young person in education has got the same chances in that system as any other child. And that can be for a variety of reasons, be those through societal and economic, or be that through ASN. So I do appreciate that on the front of it, it looks like the money's not going out of the door, but the promotion now is to take a 4-year stance on PEF and actually allow schools some time to strategically plan. Where they've not got money out of the door, to bring it back to what this must look and feel like, it's very much been around about the hope of being able to appoint staff, in terms of some of those things around about, from Councillor Stewart's point, around about inclusion, and then not being able to appoint staff, and those costs can sit there. And I know my financial colleagues, we've always got a bit of a dichotomy in terms of the financial year doesn't match the academic year in education, so we do always seem as if we're going to have a huge underspend. We have appointed an officer, Councillor Mabin, Katrina Neal, who is now our equity lead, because obviously we're moving away from being SAC authorities in Scotland to all being SEF authorities. So ultimately what we've wanted to do is put someone in overall charge of all of those. But what I do have, Councillor Mabin, and what I'd be happy to supply you with is probably a more narrative update on where all of those are. So we chase these up every month. We look at the PEF figures and have that conversation with heads where there is maybe a concern, because on the front of it, it looks like the money's not leaving the building, and then clearly there's going to be concerns about why is it not being used, particularly in this economic climate. So ultimately, we've got an officer in charge of that. I'd be happy to supply you with a much better update, but I think the real headline here has got to be that the schools are now empowered to spend this in a much more coherent way, which is to think about their planning cycles and actually look at the money in the long term. They know what they're going to have in PEF now for the next 4 years. It's the big step change. It used to be a bit more wait and see, whereas actually now schools have got a pretty firm hand on what they'll get, and they're being encouraged in the space to think on a much longer term rather than this, there's your money this year, get it out the door. So actually what they can do is maybe think of a 3-year programme, thinking about literacy, for example, and they can then put something really robust in place. So I'm certainly not telling you not to be concerned. We would always be concerned if on a report it doesn't look as if someone's utilising their funds, but we absolutely are, Councillor Mabin, and I'm happy to supply that further narrative, because that indeed was some of the questions that came up rightly at Cabinet when this was first aired there as well. So I hope that goes some way to answer it, Councillor Mabin, but I'm happy to supply further narrative as well.
Thank you, Linda, for that answer. I'm very interested in what they're going to do with this big amount of money on future years. I mean, in the Grange Education Group, Shortleys Primary School there has got more than double the funds of the other primary schools in that group. So
Yeah, I think we'll get that information.
They could be very,
they could be very
ambitious with a huge amount of money like that, I suppose. So
no, the reason Shortleys gets around about $250,000 a year is absolutely based on its deprivation factor, Councillor Mabin. So when you see a school with more money, it's absolutely reflective of the deprivation factor in the school, and Shortleys has a huge school role, but also a huge level of deprivation.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sorry, I'm just conscious we do have some of the next occupants in the room, and it is 5-2. Obviously, the other items will be continued. I just don't know how you want to finish up with this particular one. If members are nearly done, nobody wants to curtail scrutiny. Equally, the next East Ayrshire Performs will probably be at GNS in February, if not the continued one in January. So we're just in betwixt and between. But I'm conscious I will need to go just to tell people we're minded that they're due in, and we'll let them in shortly. But we are in the middle of an item, so it was just to give members opportunity to bring this one to a close, because of necessity we need to be out of here by 1 o'clock. Sorry.
Okay, folks, does anybody? You've obviously read the reports. Is there any questions that anybody has for any of the sections within the report? None at all. So just on that, we don't see anybody with any questions. So there's no questions for the East Ayrshire Performs for each of the sections within the East Ayrshire Performs that we haven't already covered. Okay. What I'm proposing to do is what we haven't covered, we adjourn the meeting and take it to a future meeting, and we'll cover the items then. Is that agreed? Okay. Okay, then we'll just close the meeting now. Okay, thanks very much for your attendance and your input. Thank you.